Pilot yells at black girl to move to economy. Seconds later, her grandma buys the whole plane. Listen closely, because this is a story that'll leave you breathless. Imagine stepping onto a plane, excited for the journey ahead, only to be met by the last person you'd expect to show prejudice, the pilot himself. The tension crackles in the air as he singles out a young black girl, trying to force her from her seat in first class to the cramped rows of economy. Little does he know, her grandmother is not only nearby, she's a woman of astonishing resources and even greater courage. And in the next few hours, an incident of shocking discrimination will meet the most dramatic, unbelievable twist of fate you've ever heard. It was an unusually crisp autumn morning at John F. Kennedy International Airport. Sunlight glimmered off the massive windows lining Terminal 4, illuminating the bustling corridor of passengers rolling suitcases behind them. The entire concourse hummed with an odd sort of excitement, a crackling energy born of departures, arrivals, and the endless swirl of human stories crossing paths under one giant roof. In a quiet corner, near a wall lined with charging stations, sat a young girl named Mara Davis. She was tall for her age, only 14, but with a composure that hinted she had experienced more of life's complexities than most kids ever would at that stage. With her braided hair swept back into a neat ponytail, she was focused intently on a hardcover book about airplanes, specifically the Boeing 737 series, her favorite subject. Since childhood, Mara had dreamed of becoming a pilot. Something about the freedom of flight, the mastery of the cockpit, and the chance to see the world from above had always captivated her imagination. Her grandmother, Loretta Davis, sat close by, sipping tea from a portable thermos and observing her granddaughter with quiet pride. Loretta was a regal woman in her late 60s, wearing a timeless ensemble of a fitted dark blue jacket and pressed trousers. While she appeared modest, Loretta carried an aura that suggested her presence commanded respect. There was a subtle gentleness about her, balanced by a steely assurance that blossomed whenever she had to defend someone she loved. As people scurried past, occasionally bumping Mara's bag, Loretta noted the looks they received. Most were polite, some curious, and a few blatantly dismissive. She had grown up in a world where opportunities for black women were stifled, but she had overcome adversity at every turn. Loretta was, in fact, an accomplished entrepreneur, a self-made business magnate whose financial prowess remained mostly hidden unless circumstances called her to wield it. The day's plan was simple. Mara and Loretta were flying first class on a new route to Los Angeles. For Mara, it was a chance to see her cousin graduate from college, and for Loretta, it was an opportunity to give her granddaughter a taste of the finer side of travel. A few hours in the air, a plush seat, and some grandmother-granddaughter bonding time. All seemed well. While waiting for their flight to be called, Mara flipped through her airplane manual, engrossed in reading about turbofan engines. She hardly noticed a figure standing in the open corridor beyond them, an older man in a pilot's uniform, wearing a scowl that made him look like he was chewing on nails. His name was Captain Richard McAllister, a longtime pilot for the airline, and from the expression on his face, it seemed the morning was already testing his patience. Captain McAllister was known among the staff for his excellent flying record, but also his prickly temperament. He often complained about unruly passengers, entitled youth, and anyone else he considered beneath his professional standards. The airline valued his decades of experience, but his colleagues whispered among themselves that he was increasingly out of touch with the times, refusing to adapt to modern expectations of courtesy and inclusivity. Before boarding officially started, Captain McAllister strode up to the gate agent, muttering something under his breath. Loretta watched him, her eyes narrowing as she noticed the gate agent's expression shift from polite attention to clear discomfort. She had seen that kind of exchange 1,000 times in her life, a man with authority pressing the boundaries of etiquette, and a subordinate forced to placate him. It was enough to set her senses on alert, though she had no inkling just how relevant that tension would become in the next few hours. Finally, the boarding announcement crackled through the loudspeaker. We are now inviting our first-class passengers, as well as families traveling with small children or anyone needing extra time, to begin boarding. That was their cue. Loretta motioned to Mara, who gathered her belongings and rose with a flutter of excitement. Mara stepped onto the aircraft with a sense of awe. She always did, every time she flew. The cabin smelled faintly of brewed coffee and new upholstery. The flight attendants greeted them with professional smiles. Mara could not resist glancing into the cockpit as they passed, only briefly catching the gleam of hundreds of switches and glowing screens. She wanted so badly to take a seat right in there one day, to chart courses across the clouds. Their seats in first class were plush, and the overhead bins provided more than enough space for their carry-ons. Loretta gave Mara the window seat, which the teenager settled into with a grin of pure delight. She reached for her seatbelt, carefully buckling it before rummaging in her backpack for a small notebook where she jotted down flight details, flight number, departure time, weather conditions. She was methodical, treating this like a training exercise for her future dream job. Loretta watched her granddaughter's excitement, her own heart warming at the memory of how she had once been a dreamer too, a young woman from a modest background, forging a business empire. She had succeeded beyond her wildest dreams. Soon, she thought, it would be Mara's turn to change the world. Moments before takeoff, Captain McAllister emerged from the cockpit to double-check the cabin. It wasn't standard procedure usually. The flight attendants oversaw the final cabin check while the pilot prepped instruments. But McAllister had a habit of taking a walk down the aisle whenever something or someone piqued his interest or annoyance. As he strolled through first class, his eyes landed on Mara. Perhaps it was the way she was scribbling down notes on her notepad, or maybe it was some internal bias that flickered to life at the sight of a young black girl in a premium cabin. Whatever the reason, his face hardened. He stopped next to Mara's seat, peering down at her with a grim expression. Mara glanced up, confused yet polite. "Is something wrong, Captain?" she asked softly, aware of the stripes on his uniform, but uncertain why he was glaring at her. "Young lady," he said, voice dripping with condescension, "this section is reserved for first-class passengers only." He nodded pointedly at her economy-size roller bag, an item that might suggest she was traveling on a budget. "You sure you're in the right seat?" Loretta stiffened, unbuckling her seatbelt. She had encountered enough prejudice in her life to recognize it swiftly. "Captain, is there a problem with our boarding passes? My granddaughter and I are exactly where we're supposed to be." McAllister's lips pressed into a thin line. "I want to confirm your ticket. This is an expensive seat, and I've seen more than a few passengers try to sneak into first class." A hush fell over the nearby seats. A well-dressed couple across the aisle exchanged knowing glances. A business traveler behind them half rose from his seat to watch. Meanwhile, a flight attendant hustled over, clearly flustered. "Captain," she said, "I've already checked these passengers' tickets. They're fine." Mara's cheeks burned. It was humiliating to be singled out in front of the entire cabin. She looked around, seeing eyes on her, feeling the unwarranted suspicion simmering in the pilot's gaze. At that moment, she felt something she rarely did, a pang of worry that her dream of becoming a pilot might collide with the ugly realities of bias. Loretta pulled out her phone, where she had a digital copy of their first-class tickets. She lifted her chin, meeting the pilot's gaze directly. "We are valid first-class passengers," she said. Now, if you'll excuse us, we're preparing for takeoff. Captain McAllister's face turned red, as if infuriated by Loretta's composure. He pivoted on his heel and stormed back to the cockpit without another word. The air in the cabin felt thick with unspoken tension. Mara swallowed, feeling tears prick the corner of her eyes. Loretta gently placed a hand over her granddaughter's. "Stay calm, baby girl," she whispered. "We've done nothing wrong." The plane took off smoothly, climbing above the eastern seaboard. The flight attendants began their service, offering beverages and snacks to the first-class passengers. Loretta asked for herbal tea, and Mara requested orange juice. An attempt at normalcy settled over them, though an undercurrent of anxiety lingered, fueled by the pilot's earlier behavior. Mara tried to lose herself in the beautiful view outside the window. The city below looked like a cluster of toy buildings. She sketched random shapes in her notebook, forcing a smile whenever Loretta caught her eye. She wanted to show her grandmother she was brave, but halfway through the flight, the pilot's voice crackled over the intercom for a routine announcement about weather and flight time. Mara found herself gripping her armrest, as though the pilot's voice itself carried a threat. Sensing this, Loretta placed her hand gently on Mara's, trying to impart reassurance. The tension escalated unexpectedly. Just as the flight attendants began the meal service in first class, Captain McAllister reappeared in the cabin, this time with a narrowed gaze that locked onto Mara once again. Without preamble, he announced, "I've received a report that an unauthorized passenger is in first class. This will not be tolerated under my command." Loretta's jaw dropped. "Captain, we've already clarified this issue. There is no unauthorized passenger here. Is there something on your passenger manifest that suggests otherwise?" The pilot's glare could have cracked glass. "I need you to step aside, ma'am. The young lady will have to relocate. We'll upgrade someone more deserving to this seat." A collective gasp rippled through the first-class cabin. The flight attendants exchanged horrified looks. Mara's eyes brimmed with tears of disbelief. Loretta's entire body went rigid, a regal fury sparking in her gaze. "Captain," Loretta said, every syllable a controlled flame. "I'm only going to say this once. My granddaughter and I are traveling together in these seats. You have absolutely no right to force her to move. If there's an issue, we can discuss it calmly, but you will not speak to her like that." Captain McAllister snorted. "Let's not make a scene," he said, his voice laced with threat. "I have the authority to ground this plane if there's a disturbance." At this point, one of the flight attendants, a young woman named Naomi, stepped forward with shaking hands. "Captain, please. We've verified their tickets. There's no seat discrepancy." She turned to Loretta with apologetic eyes. "I'm so sorry for this confusion." McAllister ignored his subordinate. His focus was on the Davises. "I'm giving you one chance. Move to economy and nobody will be escorted off the plane when we land in Los Angeles." For a moment, Mara thought her grandmother might actually stand up and comply, just to keep the peace. But Loretta's eyes locked on McAllister with the resolve of a woman who had fought far greater battles in her lifetime. "We will do no such thing." The pilot's face twisted in rage. "Fine. Have it your way," he spat before marching back down the aisle. The entire cabin sat in stunned silence, uncertain how the confrontation would escalate. As the plane cruised at 30,000 feet, Mara's heart pounded. She looked at Loretta, who seemed calm but wore a stony expression that revealed the depth of her anger. Loretta pulled out her phone, tapping out a message in the Notes app, making sure she documented every detail. She also discreetly used the in-flight Wi-Fi to send an email to her executive assistant, explaining the situation in real time. There was something about Loretta's measured composure that hinted she was laying groundwork for a serious recourse once they landed. A couple of other first-class passengers whispered words of sympathy to Mara, One, a middle-aged woman in a tailored business suit, reached across the aisle to pat Loretta's hand. "So sorry you have to deal with that," she murmured. "It's appalling." Loretta managed a polite nod. "Thank you," she said. "We appreciate it." Meanwhile, Naomi, the flight attendant, approached them cautiously. Her voice trembled with genuine remorse. "I'm so sorry for the pilot's behavior," she said, handing them extra blankets and pillows as a peace offering. "I wish there was more I could do." Loretta smiled kindly. "It's not your fault. Let's just hope we can land without further trouble." But trouble was only beginning. A short while later, Captain McAllister's voice returned to the intercom, announcing turbulence ahead, instructing flight attendants to remain seated. The seatbelt sign illuminated. Fine. A patch of turbulence was not uncommon, but Loretta noticed it was slight at best, barely enough to rattle a plastic cup. She began to suspect the pilot was exaggerating to restrict the movement of the cabin crew. Possibly he wanted everyone seated so no one would attend to them or witness any further harassment. The turbulence passed quickly, though the seatbelt sign stayed lit. Loretta exchanged a knowing glance with Mara. They could both sense the pilot's petty attempt at intimidation. An hour later, a different flight attendant, George, managed to slip to their seats. He knelt, balancing carefully to avoid attracting the pilot's attention. "Ma'am," he said in a low voice, "I'm really sorry about the captain's behavior. This is not our airline's policy or culture. We're documenting everything, and we've alerted headquarters via internal channels." Loretta exhaled, relief warring with residual anger. "Thank you, George. I appreciate that your staff is recognizing the problem. My granddaughter and I have never been treated like this before, at least not so blatantly." George glanced nervously toward the cockpit door. "Captain McAllister can be difficult. He's had run-ins with other crew members before, but this is the first time I've ever seen him single out a passenger so aggressively." Loretta gave him a polite nod. "Well, it won't go unanswered. I can promise you that." Mara reached out and gently touched George's arm. "Thank you for standing up for us." She felt gratitude mixed with a disquieting realization of how much power the pilot wielded simply by virtue of his role. George placed a comforting hand over hers. "Just hang tight. We'll be landing in another 2 hours. Meanwhile, if you need anything, buzz me. I'll do my best." As the flight neared its final hour, tension in the first-class cabin coiled tighter with each passing minute. Mara sipped anxiously at a cup of orange juice, trying to quell the sinking feeling in her stomach. She could see how rigid her grandmother, Loretta, had become. Her posture was ramrod straight, her eyes firmly fixed on the headrest in front of her, and her jaw set with unwavering resolve. Other passengers, having witnessed the earlier confrontations, exchanged uneasy glances, some openly sympathizing with Mara and Loretta, others merely rubbernecking, unable to look away from the unfolding drama. When the captain's voice burst over the intercom, it bore an artificial pleasantness that felt more unsettling than comforting. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "as we begin our descent into Los Angeles, please remain seated with your seatbelts securely fastened. Additionally, if there are any passengers who have inadvertently taken seats they are not ticketed for, kindly move back to your assigned places in economy for final compliance checks." A ripple of disbelief spread through the cabin. Everyone knew who his remark targeted. No one else had been questioned, let alone repeatedly harassed about their seat. Mara felt a fresh wave of humiliation threatened to overwhelm her. Loretta placed a reassuring hand over Mara's, silently urging her to remain calm. The teenager blinked back tears, refusing to give Captain McAllister the satisfaction of seeing her break. Despite the audible gasps and muttered protests from neighboring passengers, the pilot did not relent. A flight attendant hurried down the aisle, clearly mortified, whispering apologies to Loretta and Mara. She gently reminded them that the flight would land soon, asking them to stay calm for just a bit longer. The seatbelt sign illuminated overhead, accompanied by a small chime that sounded ominously final, as though sealing Mara and Loretta into this tense situation with no hope of immediate escape. Outside the window, Los Angeles sprawled into view, endless grids of streets and glimmering skyscrapers in the distance. Usually, this was Mara's favorite part of flying, the thrill of spotting landmarks, the wonder of descending from the clouds. But now, every dip and turn of the plane sent her heart pounding for an entirely different reason. She worried that the moment they touched down, the pilot would find another way to humiliate them. Finally, the landing gear deployed. The engines roared and the Boeing 737 touched the runway with a jolt. Relief surged through some passengers. Their eyes darted between Loretta, Mara, and the cockpit door. The tension was not over, merely shifting to a new stage, the moment of deplaning and potential confrontation awaiting them on the ground. As the plane taxied toward the gate, Loretta's face took on a calm determination. She could sense that Captain McAllister, consumed by rage and prejudice, would try something else before letting them walk away. The question was, how far would he push, and how ready were they to stand their ground? Mara felt a swirl of relief and trepidation in her stomach as the plane finally came to a halt at Los Angeles International Airport. The seatbelt sign pinged off, prompting passengers to reach for their overhead bags and cell phones. Under normal circumstances, this would have been just another routine arrival, people lining up in the aisle, eager to stretch their legs and get on with their plans. But the energy in first class was anything but ordinary. The moment the cabin doors opened, Captain McAllister moved swiftly from the cockpit, his expression taut with grim resolve. A few passengers paused mid-aisle, their eyes darting between the pilot and the seats occupied by Loretta and Mara. Despite having been publicly corrected multiple times, McAllister seemed determined to make good on his threat to remove them or at least make a final scene. Mara's heart thudded painfully in her chest. She glanced at her grandmother, who gave her a reassuring nod as if to say, "We've stood our ground this far. We can handle whatever comes next." Following the flow of other first-class passengers, Loretta and Mara gathered their belongings and stepped into the aisle. Their fellow travelers shot them empathetic looks, silently communicating support or, in a few cases, curiosity. The pilot, however, barely waited for them to pass before barking, "This way. Follow me." His tone brooked no argument, and the tension along the jet bridge was palpable. Once they stepped out of the aircraft's threshold, the cool jet bridge air hit them, but any sense of relief was immediately eclipsed by the sight of two uniformed airport security officers waiting near the corridor walls, arms crossed over their chests. One officer, a middle-aged man with a stern but unreadable face, stepped forward. "Captain McAllister?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. "That's right," McAllister said, briskly, jerking his thumb at Mara. This passenger was occupying a first-class seat without the appropriate ticket. I'd like her and her companion detained while we sort out how they got on board. A chorus of hushed gasps escaped from the nearby passengers who were still within earshot. Loretta inhaled sharply but refused to lose her composure. She stepped forward, chin held high, and spoke in a measured tone. "You are mistaken, Captain. My granddaughter and I have valid first-class tickets. I would appreciate it if you'd refrain from any more baseless accusations." The security officers exchanged uncertain glances. One, a woman with neatly tied back hair, cleared her throat, consulting a tablet she held. "Ma'am," she addressed Loretta, "could we see some form of proof regarding your tickets?" Despite the sting of being asked to prove themselves yet again, Loretta pulled out her phone without complaint. She navigated to her digital boarding passes, complete with seat assignments, and showed them to the officers. In a calm, authoritative voice, she also provided the e-receipt of her purchase. "I trust this is sufficient." The male officer leaned in, scrutinizing the screen. He scrolled through the details with care, making sure the names, flight numbers, and seat assignments matched up. After several moments, he lifted his gaze to the pilot. "Sir, all of this looks legitimate. There's no indication these passengers were in the wrong seats." A muscle in McAllister's jaw ticked as his face flushed with frustration. "That can't be right. We had a tip, a suspicion that there was seat fraud in first class." His voice trembled slightly, betraying a mounting desperation. "They could have doctored the documents." "I'm sure you've seen it before." The female officer took a polite but firm step forward. "Captain, our scanners confirm these passes are valid. Without further evidence, we have no grounds to hold them or question them any longer." Mara, clutching her carry-on against her chest, felt a dizzying combination of anger and relief. How many times did they have to prove they belonged where they were? She glanced at her grandmother, who gave her a reassuring pat on the shoulder. "It's over," Loretta whispered. The pilot's fury now teetered on the edge of collapse. His entire demeanor radiated defeat, yet he clung to his sense of authority. Before he could utter another word, a murmur rose among the disembarking passengers lined up behind them. Several people had already begun recording on their phones, documenting the scene for social media. Whispers of, "He's the one in the wrong, and what is his problem?" permeated the air. Realizing that his stand lacked support and that every moment was being captured for the world to see, Captain McAllister took a grudging step back. Red-faced and visibly trembling, he half turned away as though to distance himself from the confrontation he had provoked. "Fine," he spat, unable to hide his frustration, "but this isn't the end of it." Loretta ignored his hollow remark and addressed the officers directly. "We'll be on our way then. Thank you for doing your job impartially." Her voice was courteous, but carried an unmistakable note of finality. With that, she placed a gentle hand on Mara's shoulder, guiding her granddaughter down the jet bridge. As they emerged into the bustling terminal, a wave of relief washed over both of them. The shouting pilot and the security officers faded into the background noise of rolling suitcases and excited greetings. Though the sting of humiliation still lingered, it was clear to everyone watching that the captain's accusations had fallen flat. Mara felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes, a combination of anxiety, anger, and an odd sense of triumph, all swirling inside her. Loretta squeezed her granddaughter's hand. "It's over for now," she repeated, her tone not just comforting but resolute. "He can't take away what's rightfully ours." And so, in that charged moment, a shaken Mara and her dignified grandmother emerged victorious, leaving a stunned Captain McAllister to grapple with the consequences of his own destructive prejudices. Outside, the California sun shone bright. Mara and Loretta headed through the terminal in silence, both feeling the emotional aftershock. Loretta paused by a row of seats near baggage claim to place a call to her personal driver. As they waited, Mara finally allowed her composure to break. "Grandma, that was awful," she choked out, tears streaming down her face. "Why did he hate us so much?" Loretta gathered her granddaughter in a hug. "Hate thrives in ignorance, baby girl. But you showed grace under pressure." Mara sniffled. "I just want to be a pilot one day. Why would he treat me like I don't belong?" Loretta stroked her hair. "You belong wherever you set your heart. And you will be a pilot. Don't ever doubt that." They met their driver, who whisked them to the Sheraton Gateway Los Angeles Hotel, a place Loretta often used for business stays. Up in the suite, Mara sat on the bed, emotionally exhausted. Loretta, on the other hand, fired off a series of emails, text messages and calls. She contacted her legal team, her public relations staff, and her airline consultant. Within an hour, a flurry of responses poured back. Word traveled fast, it seemed. "What are you planning to do?" Mara asked softly. Seeing Loretta's face hardened with resolve, Loretta pressed a button on her phone to end a call. "I'm going to right a wrong," she said. "That pilot thought he could pick on you because of your age, your appearance, your race, and he expected no repercussions. But he messed with the wrong family." Late that afternoon, Loretta's attorney, Miss Felicia Zhang, joined them at the hotel. She was a sharp, no-nonsense woman who had represented Loretta's business ventures for years. The moment she stepped into the suite, her expression was grim. "Loretta," Felicia said, "I've already spoken with the airline's regional manager. They are mortified. They're offering a formal apology and immediate suspension of Captain McAllister pending investigation." Loretta nodded. "That's a start, but I'm not stopping there." Felicia arched an eyebrow. "I had a feeling you mentioned in your email you wanted to send a message. Care to elaborate?" Loretta turned to Mara with a soft smile. "I want you to realize something, baby girl. Our family has a responsibility to change the world for the better. Sometimes that means using our resources in unexpected ways." Then she looked back at Felicia, steel in her eyes. "I'm going to buy the plane." Mara's mouth fell open. "What?" she asked, incredulous. Felicia looked equally startled, but also intrigued. "You mean you want to purchase the actual aircraft?" "Like the Boeing 737 we flew on." Loretta paced across the suite's plush carpet. "Precisely. The airframe, everything. The airline might not be willing to sell just one plane, so perhaps I'll buy a stake in their fleet. I have the capital. They've seen my offers before. Remember that time they wanted to replace older aircraft, and we discussed a potential investment." Felicia's eyes lit with recognition. "Yes, that was about 2 years ago. The airline was in talks with multiple investors to upgrade their fleet. They might be open to a direct sale if the price is right." Mara could not believe what she was hearing. "Grandma, you can really do that. Just buy a plane?" Loretta turned to her granddaughter. "Yes, I can, and I will." Her gaze flicked to Felicia. "Let's get the wheels in motion. I want that plane so that Mara and others like her will always have a seat if they choose. No more humiliations." Felicia grinned. "I'll make the calls. This is going to cause quite a stir." The airline Loretta and Mara had flown with was a reputable carrier with a global reach. Like many airlines, they were always in talks with major investors to stay competitive and modernize their fleet. Loretta, through her investment group, had the means and the track record to make such deals happen. Felicia placed the initial inquiries that evening. The airline's senior vice president, surprised but intrigued, arranged a conference call for the next morning. On that call, Loretta laid out her demands. She wanted that specific Boeing 737 tail number included. She also wanted guarantees that Captain McAllister would not only be suspended, but would face disciplinary review for discriminatory behavior. The senior vice president, a polished executive named Henry Caldwell, attempted diplomacy. "Miss Davis, we deeply regret the incident with Captain McAllister. I assure you we do not condone his actions in any way, but to purchase a single aircraft from our operating fleet is a significant endeavor. We'd have to reassign routes, manage pilot scheduling, and handle countless logistical complications." Loretta's tone never wavered. "I'm aware of the complexities, Mr. Caldwell. I'm prepared to offer a premium. I believe my attorneys have shared the initial figure." Caldwell cleared his throat. "Yes, it's extremely generous." Frankly, it's well above market value for a used Boeing 737 of that age. But the question remains, why this specific airframe? We have newer planes, more efficient models. Because it's the plane whose pilot humiliated my granddaughter, Loretta said, her voice taut. I want to turn that symbol of prejudice into an emblem of empowerment. A silence settled over the line. Then Caldwell spoke carefully. I understand. Let me consult with our board. With your offer, it may be possible to expedite a sale. We'd, of course, like to continue a positive relationship moving forward. Of course, Loretta said. Once we finalize this, I'm open to discussing broader partnerships that benefit both of us. The call ended amicably. Mara, who had listened quietly on speakerphone, stared at Loretta as though seeing her grandmother for the first time. I had no idea you had this kind of power. I mean, I knew you were wealthy, but buying a plane? Loretta softened her gaze. Money is just a tool, Mara. It can be used to build or destroy. I've worked hard all my life. Now, I want to use these resources to show the world that no one can take our dignity from us. Within hours, news of Loretta's plan began circulating through industry insiders. A few aviation forums picked it up, marveling at the rumored purchase. A large purchase, like a commercial airplane, was typically performed by corporations, governments, or established airlines, not private individuals. This alone made headlines. The added rumor of the impetus, a pilot's discriminatory act, fanned the flames of public interest. By midday, mainstream media caught wind of the story. Bloggers, online journalists, and social media accounts latched onto the narrative. Wealthy grandmother buys plane after granddaughter faces prejudice at 30,000 feet. As more outlets reported, details leaked about Captain McAllister's misconduct, the airline's embarrassment, and the hush-hush negotiations. Loretta's phone buzzed non-stop. Her PR team asked how she wanted to handle the press. Loretta opted for a direct approach. She decided to hold a small press conference at the Sheraton's conference room to clarify the situation. Mara watched from the sidelines, heart pounding, as cameras flashed and microphones were thrust forward. Loretta took the stage calmly, delivering a concise statement. My name is Loretta Davis. My granddaughter and I were passengers on a flight where we experienced discrimination by a pilot who believed my granddaughter did not belong in first class due to her appearance. Rather than let it slide, I've chosen to make a statement. I intend to purchase the very plane on which this incident occurred. I hope this action will stand as a reminder that no one has the right to decide who is worthy or unworthy based on prejudice. We all belong, especially young dreamers like my granddaughter, who aspires to be a pilot herself. I will not seek revenge, I seek transformation, and I trust that the airline with whom we are negotiating understands the gravity of this moment. The next day, that clip aired on multiple news channels, broadcast across social media platforms, and spurred countless comments. Many people praised Loretta for taking a stand. Others debated the morality of wealth enabling such an action. But nearly everyone agreed on one point. The pilot's behavior was unacceptable, and Loretta's bold move was a game-changer. Meanwhile, Captain Richard McAllister found himself in a storm of consequences. Within hours of the flight's arrival, the airline suspended him. A thorough investigation was launched, and statements from passengers and crew members poured in, describing how he'd singled out Mara with no grounds. McAllister was furious, claiming he had been misunderstood and that he was simply following protocol. But the evidence against him was overwhelming. His union-appointed attorney advised him to keep a low profile, but McAllister's pride wouldn't allow it. He reached out to certain tabloids, trying to spin his story that he was the victim of a smear campaign. that Loretta Davis was using her wealth to bully him. The tabloids who printed his side faced immediate backlash from eyewitnesses who debunked his claims. The airline internally prepared for the possibility of firing him, given the avalanche of negative publicity. Locked in his modest home in the Los Angeles suburbs, McAllister watched in dismay as his once respected name was tarnished. He had never considered himself racist. He had grown up in a bubble of certain biases that he justified as just the way things are. Now, confronted by the modern world, he realized too late that times had changed, and his meltdown had cost him almost everything. A week passed, during which Felicia and the airline's legal team exchanged drafts of a purchase agreement. Finally, in a boardroom in downtown Los Angeles, Loretta signed the final documents, officially acquiring the Boeing 737 tail number N3842C for a hefty sum above market value. The airline, in turn, received a generous capital infusion, which they promised to use partly for enhanced diversity training and community outreach program stipulations. Loretta insisted on including. By the time the deal closed, the media had a new headline: "She really did it. Grandmother purchases plane at center of discrimination controversy." Reporters clamored for interviews, and social media erupted in conversation. Loretta stayed graceful, repeating her mantra that this was not about revenge, but about creating new opportunities. With the plane now in her possession, Loretta had a vision. She would repurpose it into something that would inspire young people, especially those from marginalized communities, to embrace aviation. She announced the formation of DreamWings, a non-profit program that would use the plane for educational tours, scholarship fundraisers, and flight simulation experiences to spark interest in aviation careers among youth. Mara was thrilled. She imagined the plane's interior transformed into a classroom in the skies. She pictured children stepping aboard, eyes wide with wonder, receiving hands-on lessons about aerodynamics, navigation, and the excitement of flight. No longer just a passenger, Mara saw herself as a mentor in the making, guiding kids who shared her dream. Loretta partnered with local organizations, historically black colleges, and technical academies, forging a network that promised to offer scholarships and training. Soon, DreamWings soared beyond a mere concept. Celebrities, philanthropists, and everyday citizens donated to the cause, eager to be part of a movement that championed inclusivity in aviation. While DreamWings took shape, Captain McAllister faced a hearing before the airline's disciplinary committee. The evidence was devastating: multiple passenger statements, flight attendant reports, and even video footage from cell phones. The committee ruled unanimously that he had acted with gross misconduct. He was stripped of his rank and let go. Worse still, word spread through the aviation community. With a scandal so public, it would be nearly impossible for him to secure another job at a reputable airline. He approached smaller charter companies, but they balked at the backlash hiring him would bring. One afternoon, as he sat in his sparsely furnished living room, nursing a lukewarm cup of coffee, he turned on the TV. A news segment showed Loretta and Mara standing beside the newly repainted plane, its exterior emblazoned with the DreamWings logo, a stylized silhouette of a child gazing at the sky. The reporter hailed Loretta's initiative, praising the program for giving underprivileged children a chance to see themselves in aviation. McAllister felt a knot tighten in his stomach. He was out of a job, out of respect, and out of options, while the girl he'd belittled was basking in global support. For the first time, he recognized the depth of his mistakes. The taste of karma was bitter indeed. At a small private airfield outside Los Angeles, the refurbished Boeing 737 debuted to great fanfare. Streamers, balloons, and a lively crowd filled the tarmac. Loretta, looking elegant as always, took the stage to speak about the mission of Dreamwings. Mara stood beside her, wearing a pilot's hat, a gift from a retired airline captain who wanted to encourage her dream. Local youth groups arrived by bus, stepping onto the plane in small batches. Inside, volunteers and retired aviators taught them about cockpit instruments and flight safety. Wide-eyed kids asked 1,000 questions. How do planes stay in the air? What do all these buttons do? Can I really become a pilot too? Seeing this, Mara felt tears of happiness welling up. She remembered how powerless she had felt when Captain McAllister singled her out. Now she saw hundreds of children, many with backgrounds like hers, discovering a sense of belonging in these aisles, something she almost lost on that fateful flight. Loretta, noticing Mara's emotional reaction, pulled her granddaughter into a gentle side hug. "This is our answer," she whispered. "No one can hold us down when we dare to fly." Months passed. Dreamwings blossomed, word spread across the state, and invitations poured in from community centers and schools wanting to participate. Mara took on a junior ambassador role, speaking at events about her dream to become a pilot and urging other young people to follow their passions. Meanwhile, Captain McAllister struggled to find stable footing. Realizing his reputation was in tatters, he tried to lay low. The bitterness that initially festered within him gradually gave way to a hollow sadness. He was forced to confront his internal biases and the enormity of what he'd lost due to them. One day, in a twist of fate, he found himself at the same private airfield where Dreamwings was hosting a charity fundraiser. He had come to see an old friend who was a mechanic there, hoping to pick up some part-time work. As he wandered around, he spotted the Boeing 737 in the distance, crowds of children buzzing in excitement. He felt a pang of shame, remembering how he'd once commanded that plane, how he'd believed. His authority gave him the right to treat Mara like a trespasser. Now it was repainted, refurbished, and serving a purpose infinitely nobler than his arrogance. Overwhelmed by conflicting emotions, McAllister lingered at the edge of the event, wrestling with the choice to walk away or step forward and accept accountability. Mara had just finished addressing a group of students when she spotted a familiar figure near the fence, an older man in a worn jacket, cap pulled low over his brow. She blinked, her heart jostled by recognition. It was Captain McAllister. For a moment, fear prickled at her. She remembered the humiliation, the anger in his voice. But something about his posture now seemed deflated, a remorseful slouch. Summoning courage, she approached him. Captain McAllister straightened, uncertain how to react. Up close, he saw how much Mara had grown in confidence. She wore a pilot's cap, projecting a poised presence far beyond her 14 years. "Hello," Mara said, swallowing hard. "I see you're here." McAllister cleared his throat. I was meeting someone about a job." He glanced at the plane. "I've heard a lot about Dreamwings." Mara nodded, unsure what to say next. An awkward silence followed until McAllister shifted uncomfortably. "I owe you an apology, Miss Davis." The words hung in the air. Mara regarded the man who once made her feel so small. She searched his face for sincerity. "You humiliated me in front of everyone," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "You made me question if I should even dream of being a pilot." McAllister winced, rubbing the back of his neck. "I know. I was wrong." He swallowed. "I've paid for it more than you'll ever know, and I'm sorry." Mara sighed, tension easing from her shoulders. "Okay," she said quietly. "I accept your apology. I hope you learned something." He nodded, tears glistening in his eyes. "I have." At that moment, Loretta noticed them from afar and approached, her expression guarded. "Captain McAllister," she said coolly. "Surprised to see you here." McAllister touched the brim of his cap. I was just leaving." I apologize to your granddaughter." Loretta's eyes hardened briefly, but she saw Mara's demeanor had softened. With a measured nod, Loretta responded, "Thank you for recognizing your mistake. I trust that you'll use this lesson constructively." Unable to find more words, Captain McAllister turned and left, disappearing through the crowd. Loretta slipped an arm around Mara, who seemed subdued. "Are you all right, baby girl?" Mara nodded. "Yes, I'm okay." It felt good to hear him say he was wrong. Loretta smiled gently. "You handled that with more grace than most adults would. I'm proud of you." As Dreamwings continued to flourish, other airlines took notice, launching internal diversity and sensitivity programs to avoid similar scandals. Loretta's name became synonymous with philanthropic innovation. She extended the Dreamwings blueprint to other cities, encouraging partnerships with local aviation academies. Mara became an emblem of the next generation, bold, resilient, and unafraid to break barriers. She was invited to speak at conferences, including one at a historically black university with a notable aviation program. There, she met retired African-American pilots who shared stories of the discrimination they once faced, forging an immediate bond with the young dreamer. One pilot, Captain Harriet Reed, a trailblazer who had become the first black woman to command an international flight for a major airline, offered to mentor Mara personally. "You have the makings of a great pilot," she said, smiling. "I see passion and determination in your eyes. Don't let anyone snuff that out." Mara's face lit up. "I won't," she promised. By the following year, Dreamwings had grown into a reputable non-profit with chapters in multiple states. The original Boeing 737 was still their flagship, but they had acquired simulator pods, training modules, and even secured partnerships with flight schools that offered partial scholarships to Dreamwings participants. Loretta, satisfied that the program was self-sustaining, began to step back from the day-to-day operations, allowing a new generation of leaders to thrive. She focused on strategic fundraising and expansion, weaving a network of donors and educators who believed in the cause. Each time she watched a child step aboard the Dreamwings plane, eyes shining with wonder, she felt a quiet vindication. The memory of that pilot's sneering face no longer haunted her, it fueled her mission. Time flew by. Mara, now 16, had spent her summers volunteering at Dreamwings events and studying flight theory under Captain Harriet Reed's informal tutelage. She was preparing to enter a special aviation-oriented high school program. A quiet maturity had settled upon her, the kind born of hardships and triumphs. On a bright summer day, Loretta accompanied Mara to a high-profile Dreamwings fundraiser at the same private airfield. The event also doubled as a graduation ceremony for participants who had completed a special flight simulation course. To Mara's astonishment, as she helped hand out completion certificates, the program director called her name last. "Mara Davis, please step forward." Confused, Mara walked to the front. The director winked. "We have a special gift for you, Mara, courtesy of Loretta Davis and Captain Harriet Reed." Captain Reed appeared, holding a small black box. She opened it to reveal a gleaming pilot's pin. "This pin represents your first major step toward becoming a licensed pilot," she announced. "You're enrolled in a flight training program next summer, fully sponsored, to earn your private pilot's license." Mara gasped. "Grandma?" She glanced at Loretta, tears threatening to fall. Loretta stepped forward, smiling proudly. "Surprise, baby girl, you deserve every part of it." The crowd erupted in applause, cameras flashing, as Mara clutched the pilot's pin to her heart. She felt an overwhelming surge of gratitude for her grandmother, for Dreamwings, for everyone who believed in her dream. At that moment, the humiliations of the past were overshadowed by the promise of the future. Later that afternoon, after the event wound down, Mara found herself alone on the Dreamwings 737. strolling down the empty aisle. Memories of that fateful flight surfaced: the fear, the shame, the tears she had fought to hide. She paused by the first-class seat she had occupied, recalling the pilot's hateful glare. But now she smiled. The seat, refurbished with Dreamwings branding, had become a symbol of resilience rather than rejection. She gently placed a hand on the headrest. In a few years, she would be old enough to enroll in an official pilot training program. Someday, she would captain a plane of her own, maybe even this plane, if they could manage to secure the necessary certifications. Footsteps sounded behind her. Loretta joined her, gazing down the aisle with a reminiscent look. "Hard to imagine everything that's happened here," Loretta said softly. Mara nodded. "I still can't believe you bought the plane. You really turned it into something good." Loretta slipped an arm around her granddaughter's shoulder. "You turned it into something good. Without your dream, I would never have thought to do this." A tender moment passed between them. Mara leaned her head on Loretta's shoulder. "Thank you, Grandma." Loretta squeezed Mara's hand. "The future is yours to shape, baby girl. Never let anyone tell you otherwise." And in the hush of that empty cabin, with the late afternoon sun filtering through the oval windows, Mara felt a soaring sense of possibility. Captain McAllister's hateful words were a distant echo now, drowned out by the roar of a new generation lifting off toward brighter skies. Thank you for joining us on this incredible journey where one act of discrimination was turned into a powerful movement that changed lives forever. We saw how a young girl's dream collided with a pilot's prejudice, and how her grandmother's unwavering resolve made history by purchasing the very plane at the heart of the scandal. From confronting personal bias to launching a global non-profit, this story proves that when injustice meets courage, transformation takes flight. If this story moved you, inspired you, or sparked new ideas in your heart, do us a favor, hit the like button, share this video with your friends and family, and subscribe to our channel. Together, let's spread hope, break down barriers, and remind the world that no dream is ever too big and no act of courage is ever too small. We'll see you in our next powerful tale.